Hi guys, Adam from Ecowise here. We're in, I think it's the second week of March, and I'm sitting here in the morning sun underneath this young apricot tree that's just about to flower with all these violets. Look at the way this beautiful patch of violets. You got this beautiful coloration, a violet color, I guess that's where the name of the color comes from, I guess. But there's so much variety, and there's this incredible perfume. So I'm sitting here, the warm air is rising as the ground's being heated by the sun, and it's got an incredible perfume. It's kind of, well, it smells like violet, but a lot of the violet, if you know what that smells like, when I grew up in England, there were violet drops, there were sweets in a little cardboard box, but the flavouring they used was artificial. It was a chemical that imitated this smell. But for hundreds of years, violets were a flavour that was well known to people around Europe in particular. Also it was used in China for different things, in the Middle East, but was used often in confectionery to make different kinds of sweets in particular. And this smell and the flavour that comes from it is very distinct. And actually, it smells a bit like cow poo. There's an element to it that's a bit like cow poo. Now you might think that sounds strange, like why would that be nice? But jasmine, you know, the white flowers of jasmine flowers, also they don't smell so much like cow poo, but they smell actually like rotting, putrefying flesh. There's this sweet perfume smell, but there's something underneath that if you're sensitive to it, you realize that actually it's probably the plant trying to attract insects that would eat decomposing flesh. And I'm not sure with violets if they have a similar strategy to attract flies and insects that pollinate them by giving off this smell that smells a bit like poo. Or maybe it's just me that thinks they smell like poo. But a nice kind of poo. Now, you know, some of us, of course, poo is something taboo. We don't want to smell it, we don't want to taste it, we don't want to touch it. But at the same time, it's something that we're all very familiar with, that smell. And it connects us with different cycles in nature, decomposition, and the way that what we excrete goes back into the ecosystem and becomes nutrients for the plants. But there's an amazing violet smell that is a little bit pooey. But I'm going to go over here because there's another kind of violet I want to show you. So I've just come over here, and there's some other species of violets. The ones over there were, the common name is dog violet, and these are, the common name is sweet violet, Viola odorata. And these are the ones that you would look for if you're going to use for making confectionery. They have a stronger smell, slightly different coloured purple flower, a bit more dark and a bit more kind of red purpley, a bit less blue. But they hybridize these different species. They cross very easily. In fact, here, if you look, there's some different colour ones. There's some white ones here. So it gets very difficult to actually say which is which species because they hybridize so easily through their sexual reproduction. And it's the insects that are pollinating them that allow that to happen. And probably the reason they're in patches like this is because their seeds pop out a bit later in the year after they've been pollinated and germinate just next to the adult plant. So they get these lovely patches of violets. They also spread vegetatively with stolons and make new plants by stretching out kind of underground stems and make new plants, but mostly this is probably from their seeds. These have an incredible smell. Here it's much stronger, much richer. Still a little bit, to me, cow pooey, but in a nice way. So although it's got these violets have a smell that's a bit pooey, reminds me of cow poo, I still like the smell. And actually we all, to some degree, are attracted to smells that are a bit pooey. In fact, if you think about some of the foods, it depends on different cultures, but most cultures have foods that are fermented. Smell things like smelly cheeses, which are like rotten milk, basically, with bacteria that have degraded it and partially digested it. Or you think of beer or wine or kimchi or sauerkraut. Many of the foods that we eat are fermented, and if you actually smell them, they stink. But we kind of like those smells. And in fact, some of the things that are fermented, many of the foods that are fermented, they're actually easier for us to digest. Of course, we have some kind of taboos and some sort of perhaps innate push away something that stinks rotten, because it could also have bacteria that are pathogenic or harmful. But many of the things that we eat are actually deliberately fermented and partially rotten. So the smells of something that's rotten are actually can be quite attractive to us, like the smell of jasmine. It smells a bit like putrefying flesh, and it's probably deliberately got that smell because it attracts some of the pollinators that are things like flies, or I'm not sure what pollinates, but things that are attracted to rotting meat. And again, with this smell of the violets, it smells a bit pooey, and there's a lot of plants that and fungi that imitate rotting flesh or poo to attract things that are going to spread their pores or their spores or enable them to pollinate. And even in things like the perfume industry, for thousands of years, we've used products that aren't only sweet and delicious smelling. We often use ingredients that are actually stinky, like famously there would be the anal gland of the civet or the anal gland of the musk deer. And many of the products that are added to perfumes, in combination, they smell beautiful, but if you took them on their own and smelt them, they'd smell pretty rank. So we should be a bit more open about what we find nice and what we find not nice with smells. I mean, everybody says they like the smell of their own fart. Is that true? I don't know. But, we've evolved in a world where things are putrefying, and that's part of the way that we're connected to the material cycles in our world, is things growing and decomposing. So it's an important part of our connection to the natural world, and a way we can connect with that is not just through our minds but through our senses. So the smell of these strange, sweet but somehow putrid and a bit cow-pooey smell of the violets, it's quite distinctive. And later on we're going to come down here and we're going to collect some of these. Now obviously we're not going to be greedy and take them all, but we'll take some. It's always a good idea to take less than half, and to perhaps respectfully, perhaps even ask the plants, explain what you're going to do, and maybe even certainly have your intention to be grateful and to be aware of perhaps sometimes the plants don't want to be picked. It's hard to be clear on those things, but to give some kind of, traditionally people would always ask and show respect and thanks before collecting, and be aware of, there's only 2 or 3 flowers, well, don't pick them. Here there's thousands. I'm sure if we take a few that'll be fine. And what are we going to do then? Well, what we're going to do is we've been experimenting with making hydrosols and distilling herbs to get their essence. So distilling is you heat them up in water, and then the steam that comes out, then you condense it with cold water, and you get a concentrated form of some of the essence of these flowers. And we're going to use that to do all kinds of things for cooking with, and we're going to even use it for medicinal purposes. And violets have been used, like I said, for culinary purposes and medicinal purposes for a long time. They're meant to induce relaxation. They're meant to be good for anxiety. Good for me then. High blood pressure, good for me then. All kinds of things that in this day and age where we're all a little bit stressed, well, I am anyway, something like this perhaps can help us to feel a little bit more calm. Certainly even just the smell of them right now makes me feel a little bit more calm. Not enough, but a bit. Check out this. It's either a peach or apricot. I think it's an apricot. But it's in a sheltered place and it's flowering early and it's completely full of bees that are providing an incredible service for the tree. They're pollinating the tree, and without that pollination there would be no fruit. So if we lose the bees, we've got no fruit and all kinds of other issues, as you know perhaps. And the bees have been given nectar as they spread the pollen. So it's a nice kind of exchange. Both parties benefit from it. It's a symbiotic relationship, or mutualistic. But just look at it, it's beautiful. And there's a very sweet, a bit slightly almondy smell from the flowers. And this tree's been pruned over the years. It's probably perhaps 30 to 40 years old, this tree. So they've been pruned, and they've almost certainly been grafted, where they've had branches from an apricot tree of a variety that perhaps gives a particular flavour fruit or is good for preserving, or some particular characteristic has been actually innestato in Italy, or actually grafted into this tree. So this tree is absolutely the product of humans, but because we often think of humans as being destructive and the opposite to nature and wilderness, but that's not the case. We're part of nature, we evolved from it, and when we do things with sensitivity and with awareness of our interconnection, we actually can improve biodiversity and make nature even more beautiful, like in this example. Because these flowers here have been basically, obviously the plant themselves has made the flowers, but somebody's decision to plant the tree, to do the various activities they've done with pruning it and different horticultural techniques, as well as breeding and selecting particular varieties over hundreds or thousands of years, has led to this situation right now, which is great for all the insects in the area, and it's been cut underneath. They've cut and mowed the grass underneath regularly so it hasn't become full of brambles and overgrown with vegetation, because in an area like this, if you leave it, you don't graze it, you don't burn it, and you don't cut it, grazing with animals, right? It'll turn into a woodland, and that's got all kinds of great benefits for animals and plants and organisms that like woodland. But this is an open area, which is what the violets need. They need dappled sunlight. So the violets that are underneath this, that are flowering now, and these apricot blossoms, are the direct result of humans over thousands of years selecting this kind of tree because we like apricots, and the various horticultural techniques that somebody or generations of people have done right here have produced this situation right now through a series of causes and conditions and decisions that we've made that have led to this. So is this humans bad for nature or somehow destructive to nature? No, the opposite. So just to illustrate, this beauty results from people's decisions and behaviors over time that have been sensitive and caring. Obviously now, perhaps the person that owns this maybe is being advised to spray this with a chemical so that he can get apricots that are beautiful and don't get eaten by pests and diseases. That gets more complicated. What are the repercussions for that? What would be the implications for spraying this with what to me is a nasty chemical? What would be the repercussions for the nature around here, for the violets, for the bees, and for all the other organisms that use this place and are part of this ecosystem? I don't know. If it was my apricot tree, I wouldn't want to be spraying it with anything nasty. So again, the decisions we take and our responsibilities and our sense of being nested into nature are so important in terms of where we're going and where the planet's going right now. And this is a kind of symbol for that, perhaps, somehow. That we're not separate from nature, but we're part of it in a beautiful way and connected to it. So here's a big pile of wood that's been cut just over the last few weeks, this winter. It's from a local woodland over there, and the trees in that woodland have been managed in this way for probably thousands of years, certainly hundreds. And although it looks like they've cut trees down, which they have, but they haven't actually killed the tree. They've coppiced it. They've cut it down near to the level of the ground, and then it'll shoot out with new branches and new buds that will create new leaves, and it'll grow back again to be trees. So they haven't actually killed the trees. And this is the guy we buy wood from. So he'll cut these after a few years of being seasoned to dry out to small pieces that he splits it and he cuts it, and that's what we burn to heat our house in the winter and even to cook with in the winter. Now, of course, the carbon that's been captured in this wood, because a lot of the material here, the woody material is mostly carbon. But obviously burning that will release the carbon back into the atmosphere, which could be a problem. But because I know that these trees have been coppiced, the trees themselves will grow back and the leaves will reabsorb that carbon. So in a way, the net effect on climate is probably neutral or nothing, because the trees themselves haven't been killed. So I feel relatively okay. There's oak, there's ash, I can see, and here this beautiful red here is the wild cherry, Prunus avium. Look at this beautiful color, and some of them, like this here, are hollow, naturally being hollowed out, and it could be through different beetles or different rotting or bacteria or fungi or perhaps even woodpeckers. And this one here is completely hollow, so it would make a great drum. You wouldn't have to hollow out, but you could actually create a drum from this. This would have been something very, very precious, and still is in many cultures and places in the world now, to create a drum, a hollow piece of wood. So you can actually see all the way through this. Over here, there's Cherchis australis, which is another hardwood from our area. But just check out this hollow one here. You can see right the way through it, naturally hollowed. So earlier we were talking about stinky smells and fermentation, and that leads me nicely into, I'm about to open my crock pot here that I've got turnip tops, Cima di Rapa, that I've been fermenting to make kimchi or make sauerkraut over the last day. It was put in here on the 8th of the 2nd, so it's just over a month, and it's still, there's a canal around here with water that stops air getting in, but lets the carbon dioxide as it ferments come out, and you see the bubble, you can hear it bloop, bloop. And I'm about to open it, and you never quite know what you're going to find, because this is basically being digested by lactobacteria. So you add just enough salt so that it encourages the kind of bacteria you want that aren't the dangerous kind, but are the kind that break it down and ferment it so it gets to taste a bit like a pickle. That's what pickles really are. You don't add vinegar, but you have the lactic acid, so they're the kind of bacteria that grow in salty conditions with little oxygen. So by putting water in this canal, you stop the air getting in, and this is full of the vegetable plus the water plus spices. I think I added caraway seeds and coriander and some garlic. But it's always the test, because you never know what you're going to find. It's a bit like an experiment. So I'm going to open it now and see what I see. Whew. So you immediately get a very strong smell. And what I'm going to do, and the last thing you would think with a stink like that is you're going to, well, certainly touch it, but eat it. I don't know. But I'm going to, look at this. This is like, whoa, udgy gudgy stuff here. So I'm going to look for the stones that I've weighted it down with. Here's one of the stones, and it really reeks. I mean, you know, would you really want to eat that? I don't know. It really stinks, and it's still bubbling, it's still fermenting, which is, I don't want it to over ferment because I want it to not be too squidgy and soft. So I'm going to be loading it into my jars, and I guess really what I should do at this point is try it, see what it tastes like. So, tastes good. If you like pickles, you would like that. It's not too soft. I think it's a bit soft for Yen because she doesn't like it when it's this squidgy, but it's a bit squidgy and soft. There's all the stems. Really good. So I got quite a lot. That's my job now, is to load up these jars and pass it out to friends and family. See the coriander seeds floating in there, and the stems. It's actually really good. An acquired taste, perhaps. If you like kimchi, you would love this. There's mustard seeds in there. I can see I added mustard seeds and coriander seeds. I can't see any fennel seeds or caraway seeds, cumin seeds. There's lots of ways you can tailor it and make it how you like. Garlic, I can see I've put in there. So I kind of pack it down, not too tight. And this is fermented pretty well. It's soft but not too soft, and it'll continue fermenting in the jar, so you're going to keep it in a cool place. This wants to be, to make this happen, it needs to be somewhere between like 16, maybe, I can't remember exactly, 16 and 21 degrees if it's centigrade. If it's warmer than that, it actually seems to rot and it's not good. I tried it in the summer and it didn't work. So the winter, I tried these when I did before with verza, with Savoy cabbage, and I had it out in the hall and it was too cold, so I had to bring it into the living room where we have it a bit warmer with the wood stove, and it was just the right temperature and it fermented so good, and we have almost finished that. So this is, like I said, it's the first time I've done it with cima di rapa, and so turnip tops, just like a kind of small broccoli, and it smells really good.